Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to Sweetwater Soundcheck. This time out, the latest version of a classic control surface from PreSonus. Let's get started. Today we're checking out the FaderPort 2018, the latest version of the classic FaderPort from PreSonus. The FaderPort 2018 has been completely redesigned from the ground up. It has a totally new look, as well as even more functionality compared to the original FaderPort Classic. We can control up to 40 functions from the front panel. Everything from entering automation data using the fader, to controlling different functions with on-off buttons, to navigating through our session. Let's take a tour. The FaderPort operates in one of 3 different control modes depending on what DAW you're using. When you turn it on, it defaults to Studio One mode. And Studio One does offer the most complete integration with FaderPort, but no matter what DAW you're using, you can still access a ton of different functions. To change the mode to either Huey or MCU mode for use with Pro Tools, Logic, Cubase, Live, or any other DAW, you turn on the power switch while holding down certain buttons, and that changes the mode that you're operating in. It's very easy to do. In addition to the USB port, the back panel also has a foot switch input. Now that can be assigned to a variety of different functions depending on your DAW, but it defaults to punch in, so it allows for hands-free recording if you have an instrument in your hands. The top panel of the FaderPort is divided into several different sections. Here on the right, the most obvious feature is the 100mm motorized fader, and that's used for entering automation data, for controlling volume or pan on a channel. At the bottom, we have transport controls, and those are fairly obvious in their operation. We have stop, we have play and pause, we have record, we also have fast forward, rewind. If we have a loop set up, as here, we can turn looping on and off for either recording or for playback. And we have a return to zero function that you access by pressing the fast forward and rewind buttons at the same time. At the top of the FaderPort, we have channel and automation controls. So if we press solo, we'll solo the particular track that we have selected. We can scroll down to the next track, solo will move. We can turn that off by pressing the solo button. And if we have multiple channels soloed, we can hit shift and solo, and all of those will be cleared. We can also momentarily solo a track by pressing and holding the solo button. The mute function works in a very similar fashion. Press to mute a track, we can scroll down to additional tracks, and we can clear those by hitting shift and mute. If we press and hold the mute button, we'll momentarily mute the track that's selected. To record arm a track, we hit the arm button. And as we scroll through, we can access the different tracks. If we want to record arm everything at once, we hit shift and hit arm all. Moving to the next row of keys, the bypass switch bypasses all of the plugins on the selected channel. So we'll select channel 4 here, and you can see that I have an analog delay, a chorus, and a limiter instantiated here. If we hit the bypass switch, all of those will be bypassed simultaneously. This is great for doing before and after comparisons. We can turn all the plugins back on by hitting bypass again. Now if you want to turn off all the plugins inside your mix, hit the shift command and hit bypass, and you can see that all of the plugins here, as well as all of the plugins here, have been bypassed. And we can turn those all back on with one button press. Our next 3 buttons control automation functions. The first accesses touch, and when we press switch, latch mode. The next button accesses automation right. And if automation trim is supported in your DAW, you access that by pressing the shift key and hitting the right button. You can turn automation read on and off using the read button. Let's take a look at how easy it is to write automation into a track using the FaderPort. We'll select our track here. We'll use track 4. Let's make that a bit larger so it's easier to see. We'll turn on automation, and we'll choose volume. Now we'll press right on the FaderPort, hit the record button, and we can immediately be writing automation data. We'll stop, we can rewind, switch to read mode, and now when we play back, our automation has been written into the track. Now we could use touch mode, latch mode, or trim mode if our DAW supports it to modify that automation as well using the fader. In the center of the FaderPort we have 3 multi-purpose controls. Those are the previous button, the next button, and the central data encoder. Depending on what function you have accessed on the FaderPort, the previous and next switches may move you from track to track to track, they may change banks of tracks, might move you from event to event, and so on. So they're used for stepping through different functions in your DAW. Likewise, the encoder is used for scrolling through different functions. Pressing the encoder also gives you access to a variety of parameters and functions. A great feature is when you press shift, the previous and next buttons now become undo and redo buttons. So we can undo our recording, or we can redo if we choose. The final 8 buttons in the FaderPort are used for navigating in your session. First up, we have the link control. Now link allows you to place the cursor over whatever parameter you want, and when you turn the encoder, that parameter will be accessed. So we could hover over delay speed on our plugin, and we can change that. If you press the encoder, you'll return to your default setting. So if we've got our volume down here, we're hovering over it, we press the encoder, we'll return to 0 dB. We can also lock the encoder to whatever parameter we choose. So let's say we're hovering over delay speed here, so we're adjusting that with our encoder. If we hit Shift and lock, we're now latched onto that particular parameter, and we can move to other things and still access delay speed in our original channel because we're locked to that parameter with the FaderPort. If we hit the pan switch, the encoder is now controlling pan for the selected channel. And again, pressing that will return us to default, which is the center. If we hit Shift and pan, the motorized fader is now our pan control. This is great for writing automation. The channel button allows us to access the channel parameters. Again, we can scroll through channels here. We can use the previous and next buttons to navigate through those as well. We can also choose to lock the FaderPort to the functions of a particular channel by hitting Shift and selecting the channel button. Now, no matter what channel we have selected, we'll still be soloing and muting the channel that we're locked to. When we hit the scroll button, the encoder scrolls us through our session. So it makes for very fast navigation. Previous and next still move us through the different channels. If we hit Shift and scroll, we engage the zoom function inside the FaderPort, so we can zoom on a track. So let's do that. We'll select this here. Now at this point, the encoder becomes horizontal zoom, and the previous and next become track height zoom. When we hit the master button on the next row, the encoder now adjusts our master fader here on the far right. And we can return to 0 dB by pressing the encoder. The click button turns the metronome on and off. You can see that down here at the bottom of the Studio One screen. The section button allows us to move through different sections inside our arrangement, as well as to nudge an event. So for example, we can move through our different data points in our track by using the next button and the previous button. Now this would work with audio regions, different sections in our arrangement, and so on. So it's actually quite a nice way to move among the different parts of your session. We can also use a FaderPort to drop markers into our session and to access those markers. So if we turn marker mode on, we hit play. As we're playing, every time we hit the encoder, we'll drop a new marker in place. We can navigate among those markers using the previous and next buttons. Finally, we can access 4 different function keys from the FaderPort. Those are assignable commands, and those are down here below the last 4 buttons that we talked about, F1, F2, F3, and F4. You access those by hitting the Shift key and then the button. So for example, if we hit Shift and F1, we open the inspector. Shift F3 opens and closes the mixer, Shift F4 is the browser, and so on. Editing those is as easy as going to External, double-clicking our FaderPort, and now by control-clicking, we can assign whatever command we want. There's a huge array of commands available that can be assigned to those function keys. So you can really customize the operation of the FaderPort using those 4 function keys. You can assign them to some of your most used commands or use them for opening and closing windows as we're doing here. I hope you've enjoyed this quick look at the new FaderPort from PreSonus. It really is an awesome device to have on your desktop. It's so nice to be able to navigate within your session, enter automation, and control functions by reaching over and hitting an actual button rather than having to do it with a keyboard and a mouse. It really enhances your workflow in the studio. Thanks for joining me for Sweetwater Soundcheck. I'm Mitch Gallagher.